"You're fired." The cold command echoed across the mansion's dining room, before the breakfast plates had even touched the table. The plus-size personal chef didn't flinch. She calmly untied her apron, folded it with surprising care, and placed it beside the untouched meal she had spent 2 hours preparing. "Perfect," she said with a small smile. I quit. Every servant froze. A bodyguard nearly dropped his radio. Someone quietly muttered a prayer. For years, the feared Mafia boss had ended countless careers with those 2 words. No one had ever answered him by walking away first. He took a slow step toward her. "You don't get to leave." She picked up the worn canvas bag that had always sat beside the kitchen door. "This time," she said without turning around, "you're 30 seconds too late." When the front door closed behind her, the most powerful man in the room did something no one inside the mansion had ever witnessed. He ran after the only woman who had never been afraid to argue with him. No one inside the Ashcraft-Oft estate could remember exactly when the rules had stopped applying to the woman in the kitchen. The rules were simple. Never keep the boss waiting. Never interrupt him when he was working. Never tell him he was wrong. Most importantly, never argue. Hundreds of employees had learned those lessons the hard way. Some lasted years, some lasted weeks. A few didn't even survive their first day before quietly disappearing from the payroll. Yet every morning, one woman walked through the mansion's back entrance, carrying 2 oversized grocery bags, as though she owned the place. Her name was Clara Ara Bennett. She wasn't a bodyguard. She wasn't a conciliar. She wasn't family. She was simply the boss's plus-size personal chef. At least that was what everyone believed. By 7:00, the kitchen had already come alive. Pans hissed. Fresh bread filled the air with warmth. Coffee beans crackled inside the grinder. The staff moved with military precision because they all knew one truth. If breakfast wasn't perfect, someone would be blamed. Unfortunately for them, the boss almost never ate it. When Clara Ara carried the tray into the dining room, she found him exactly where she expected, still wearing yesterday's suit. Tie loosened, eyes fixed on a stack of reports. A cup of black coffee already sat beside him. Untouched eggs, fresh fruit, warm toast, homemade soup. He ignored all of it. Instead, he reached for another espresso. Clara Ara sighed before anyone else could. "No." The single word floated across the silent room. Several servants instinctively lowered their heads. The boss slowly lifted his eyes. No one else would have survived saying that word to him. "I wasn't asking." His voice was calm, almost lazy. Clara Ara walked over, picked up the tiny espresso cup, and placed it back on the serving tray. "I know. That's why I'm answering." A young housemaid nearly stopped breathing. One of the guards discreetly stepped closer, expecting the morning to end badly. Instead, the boss leaned back in his chair. "You've become very brave." "No." Clara Ara slid the breakfast plate closer to him. "I've become very tired." He looked at the food, then back at her. "I have meetings. You also have a heartbeat. I don't have time. You'll have even less time if you keep living on coffee." A faint chuckle escaped someone near the doorway. It disappeared the moment the boss glanced in that direction. Silence returned instantly. Only Clara Ara remained completely unfazed. She folded her arms. "You skipped dinner?" "I wasn't hungry." "You skipped lunch too. I was busy. And yesterday's breakfast?" He didn't answer. She smiled with quiet satisfaction. "I keep count." The corner of one elderly butler's mouth twitched. Everyone in the mansion secretly enjoyed these daily battles. Not because they expected Clara to win, but because somehow she usually did. The boss finally picked up a fork, only one bite. Nothing more. Clara nodded. Good. He frowned. Don't look so proud. You ate one bite. That's one more than yesterday. She turned to leave. Behind her came his voice. The coffee? She looked back. No, I'll have one. No, you don't give orders here. She smiled without missing a beat. Neither does caffeine. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the feared MafiaBoss quietly reached for the toast instead. A collective breath swept through the room. One accountant whispered under his breath. She did it again. The old butler beside him shook his head. No. She reminds him he's still human. That strange routine became the favorite entertainment of the estate. If the boss worked through lunch, Clara appeared. If he stayed in his office until midnight, she somehow found him. If he ordered everyone to leave, she ignored the order completely. Once she walked into a strategy meeting involving senior members of the organization, carrying nothing more dangerous than a bowl of chicken soup. The room had gone silent. Maps covered the walls. Phones rang non-stop. Men discussed shipments worth millions. Clara walked straight through them. She placed the bowl beside the boss. You forgot lunch? Without looking up, he answered, I'm busy. So is your immune system. Several men stared at the table. Nobody dared smile. She closed the folder he had been reading. Eat first. I'll eat later. You said that 6 hours ago. He finally looked up. Who exactly do you think you are? The only employee willing to argue with you before your blood sugar makes you impossible. A dangerous silence followed. One captain quietly prepared himself for an explosion. Instead, the boss let out something so rare that nobody reacted at first. A sigh. Long defeated. He picked up the spoon. The entire room relaxed. Someone actually smiled. As Clara walked toward the door, she spoke without turning around. See, you can win arguments after lunch, too. Even the boss couldn't stop the corner of his mouth from moving. Barely. But Clara noticed. She always noticed. What nobody else understood was that she never challenged his authority. She challenged his habits. There was a difference. Everyone feared the man. She worried about him. Unfortunately, concern often sounded a lot like defiance, and the boss had spent too many years surrounded by people who obeyed him to recognize the difference. 3 days later, an important delegation arrived at the estate. The dining room sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Every chair was occupied. Every course had been timed perfectly. Everything looked flawless, until Clara noticed the small silver flask sliding from the boss's inside pocket. Not whiskey, double-strength espresso concentrate. She walked over before anyone could stop her. No, the conversation around the table instantly died. The boss looked at her. Excuse me. She held out her hand. Give it to me. Foreign guests exchanged confused glances. Was the chef ordering the MafiaBoss around? His expression hardened. I'll decide what I drink, and I'll decide what I serve. It isn't your decision. It becomes my decision when it threatens the person eating my food. His jaw tightened. You've forgotten your place. Her answer came immediately. My place has always been right here. Another heartbeat of silence. Then something inside him finally snapped. Enough. Every glass on the table seemed to vibrate with the force of his voice. "You're fired." No one moved. No one blinked. The words echoed through the enormous dining room. Clara Ara looked at him for several long seconds. There was no anger, no pleading, no tears. She simply untied her apron, folded it carefully, placed it beside his untouched breakfast. Perfect. She reached for the worn canvas bag, waiting beside the kitchen door. "I quit." Then, with the same calm smile she wore every morning, she turned toward the exit. Not a single person tried to stop her, because everyone believed the boss would. He didn't. Not immediately. By the time he pushed back his chair, the front door had already closed, and for the first time since she had entered his life. She walked away without looking back. The mansion lasted exactly 43 minutes without Clara Ara. That was how long it took before breakfast turned into complete chaos. One cook overcooked the eggs. Another served sourdough instead of rye. Someone replaced fresh rosemary with dried oregano. Nobody noticed the mistakes except the boss. He pushed the plate away after one bite. "This isn't hers." The new chef swallowed nervously. "It's the same recipe, sir." "No," he stood. "It isn't." No one argued. Not because they understood the difference, because neither did he. All he knew was that the food suddenly tasted empty. By lunchtime, 3 chefs had already been dismissed. One had added too much salt. Another had forgotten fresh pepper. The third had prepared everything perfectly. That somehow irritated him even more. The old butler watched the kitchen descend into panic before quietly saying something no one dared say aloud. Perhaps it was never just about the food. No one answered. Everyone was thinking the same thing. For the first time in years, the mansion was silent. Not peaceful, empty. There were no sarcastic remarks floating out of the kitchen. No arguments over coffee. No voice reminding the boss that skipping meals was not a personality trait. Even the clocks seemed louder. That afternoon, while searching for an old menu in the kitchen office, the housekeeper opened the bottom drawer of Clara Ara's desk. Inside lay a neatly organized folder. Medical receipts, savings records, cooking notes, and one envelope. Across the front, in careful handwriting, were 4 simple words. Resignation letter. The date stopped everyone cold. It had been signed 3 weeks earlier. The housekeeper rushed the folder to the boss's office. He stared at the envelope for several seconds before opening it. There was no complaint, no accusation, no mention of being fired. Only a brief note. "Thank you for letting me cook here. I only hope that one day you'll remember to eat before your coffee gets cold." He read it again. Then a third time. The letter had been written long before their argument. She hadn't left because he fired her. She had already decided to leave. That realization unsettled him far more than her resignation itself. His head of security entered quietly. "We found nothing suggesting she's accepted another position." The boss looked up. No restaurant, no private client, no hotel, no competitors. He frowned. "Then why leave?" The security chief hesitated. "We're still looking." For the first time in years, the boss ordered an investigation that had nothing to do with rival families or criminal business. He wanted to know where his chef had gone. 2 days later, the answer arrived. The report was surprisingly thin. No luxury apartment, no expensive car, no secret employer. Instead, there was a modest 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, regular hospital visits, a long list of medical appointments, and years of bank transfers sent to the same university account. He turned another page. The account belonged to her younger brother. Every semester's tuition, paid by Clara Ara. The security chief spoke softly. According to our investigation, she's been supporting him since he was 16. The boss remained silent. Another page. Medical diagnosis. Recommended surgery. Treatment delayed. Reason? Patient declined due to financial hardship. He looked at the date 6 months earlier. Another recommendation delayed again. Clears throat. Another wound again. The security chief cleared his throat. Our investigator also spoke with the landlord, and she never spends money on herself. The room fell silent. Apparently, he glanced at the report. She owns only 2 winter coats. The newer one is 8 years old. The boss slowly leaned back. He suddenly remembered every argument they had ever had. She always insisted on buying the cheapest ingredients for herself, yet somehow managed to serve him the freshest produce available. She repaired her own shoes. She never replaced her cracked phone. She packed leftovers to take home. He had assumed she was simply frugal. He had never wondered why. Meanwhile, the mansion continued falling apart in increasingly ridiculous ways. One replacement chef prepared 17 different breakfast options because no one knew which one the boss actually preferred. He rejected all 17. Another chef asked for a written list of his favorite meals. No one could provide one because there wasn't one. Clara Ara had never cooked according to a list. She watched him. If he looked exhausted, breakfast became lighter. If meetings ran late, dinner waited instead of drying out. If he seemed unusually stressed, dessert appeared without explanation. She never asked. She simply knew. The new staff tried copying her recipes. Nothing worked. The soup tasted correct. The bread looked identical. Even the sauces matched her handwritten instructions. Still, every meal felt incomplete. One evening, the old butler quietly placed a bowl of vegetable soup in front of the boss. It's her recipe. The boss tasted it. The flavor was almost perfect. Almost. He put the spoon down. What's missing? The butler smiled sadly. I don't believe it's written in the recipe. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. The boss looked toward the kitchen. The lights were on. People were working. Pots were boiling. Plates were being prepared. Yet somehow, the busiest room in the mansion had never felt so lifeless. Late that night, unable to sleep, he wandered into the now quiet kitchen. Clear's throat. Everything was spotless, exactly as Clara Ara had always left it. His eyes settled on a small notebook tucked behind a row of cookbooks. He opened it. There were no recipes inside, only tiny reminders written to herself. Boss skipped breakfast again. Add more fruit tomorrow. He looked exhausted today. Less coffee, more tea. Remember to hide vegetables inside the pasta sauce. He'll never notice. Then he reached the final page. A single unfinished sentence. I hope he'll learn to take care of himself before the words stopped there. The rest of the page was blank. He stared at it for a very long time. For the first time since she walked away, he realized the woman he thought had been challenging his authority had quietly been protecting his life all along. For the first time in nearly 15 years, Damien Ashcraft cancelled an entire afternoon of meetings. No one questioned the decision. His advisors assumed a rival family had made an unexpected move. His security team expected an emergency. Instead, the feared Mafia boss sat alone in his office, staring at a single address printed on a sheet of paper. It wasn't a warehouse. It wasn't a safe house. It wasn't the home of an enemy. It was an old community center on the east side of the city. According to the investigator's report, Clara Ara Bennett spent every Saturday there. No salary, no publicity, no sponsors. She simply showed up. Curiosity won. The following Saturday, Damien exchanged his tailored suit for a plain grey sweater, a baseball cap, and jeans that had clearly never belonged in his wardrobe. His chief of security blinked twice. "Sir, are you sure about this? I'm going to observe. Should we send a team?" "No. What if someone recognizes you?" Damien adjusted the cap lower. "They'll be too busy laughing." Neither of them realized how accurate that prediction would become. The community center occupied an aging brick building, squeezed between a library and a flower shop. Children's laughter echoed through the open windows long before Damien reached the entrance. A hand-painted sign hung above the door. "Free cooking class today." Inside, nearly 20 children crowded around stainless steel tables that had seen better days. Flour dust floated through the air like snow. Someone had spilled milk. 2 boys were arguing over a whisk. 3 little girls proudly showed off cookies that looked nothing like cookies. And in the middle of the cheerful chaos, Clara Ara stood wearing a faded blue apron. She looked different. Not because of her clothes, because she was smiling. Not the polite smile she wore inside the mansion. Not the amused smile she used before winning another argument. This smile reached her eyes. She laughed so freely that the entire room seemed brighter. Damien stopped walking. For a brief moment, he wondered whether he had ever truly seen her before. One little boy tugged on Clara Ara's sleeve. "Miss Clara Ara, my pancakes look funny." She crouched beside him. "They're supposed to—" He frowned. "They are, of course." She held up the oddly shaped pancake. "Perfect circles are boring." The children giggled. She pointed toward another table. "See that one?" A little girl proudly lifted a pancake that looked suspiciously like a turtle. Clara Ara clapped enthusiastically. "I've never seen a turtle pancake before." The little girl's face lit up. Damien found himself smiling before he realized it. A volunteer noticed him standing near the entrance. "Here for the class?" He hesitated. Before he could invent an excuse, Clara Ara looked up. Their eyes met. For half a second, surprise crossed her face. Then it disappeared. She simply smiled politely. "New student." Every child turned toward him. 20 pairs of curious eyes waited. Leaving now would have been easier. For some reason, he stayed. 10 minutes later, the most feared Mafia boss in the city found himself wearing a bright yellow apron covered in cartoon vegetables. One of the children laughed. "It has carrots on it." Another pointed and smiling onions. Damien looked down at himself. He had negotiated billion-old deals, faced armed rivals without blinking. Nothing had prepared him for smiling onions. Clara Ara walked over carrying a cutting board. "First lesson." She placed an onion in front of him. "Clear as throat, dice it." He reached confidently for the knife. Within seconds, the onion rolled off the board. The knife slipped harmlessly onto the counter. The children burst into laughter. A little boy raised his hand. "Mister, have you ever cooked before?" Damien answered honestly. "No." The boy nodded thoughtfully. I could tell. Even Clara Ara had to bite her lip to hide a laugh. It didn't work. A soft chuckle escaped her. Anyway, he looked at her. There it was again. Clear as throat. That genuine laugh, the sound the mansion had been missing. The next assignment wasn't much better. He burned garlic, overmixed pancake batter, nearly dropped an entire bowl of flour. At one point, he somehow managed to set off the smoke alarm without actually cooking anything. The shrill alarm echoed through the room. Children covered their ears. Someone opened every window. Clouds of harmless smoke drifted toward the ceiling. Damien looked around awkwardly. I don't think that was supposed to happen. A tiny girl, no older than 6, nodded with complete seriousness. I don't think so either. The room exploded with laughter. Even Damien couldn't help laughing at himself. The sound surprised him. It felt unfamiliar, natural. He couldn't remember the last time laughter hadn't been forced or calculated. After class ended, the children rushed outside, carrying small paper bags filled with the treats they had made. One little boy hugged Clara Ara tightly before leaving. See you next Saturday. I'll be here. Another child handed Damien a badly decorated cookie. For trying, he accepted it as though it was something priceless. When the room finally grew quiet, Clara Ara began wiping down the tables. She didn't look at him. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to come. I noticed. She smiled faintly. The onions gave you away for the first time since she had left the mansion. Their conversation sounded almost normal. No shouting, no arguments, only silence stretching comfortably between them. Damien glanced around the room. You do this every week? Every Saturday for free? She shrugged. I had someone teach me when I was little. So now you teach them. They deserve one place where nobody expects them to be perfect. Her words lingered. He suddenly remembered the little boy with the crooked pancakes. She hadn't corrected him. Clear's throat. She had celebrated him. That wasn't just how she cooked. It was how she lived. His eyes drifted toward a shelf filled with framed photographs. Children, birthday parties, graduation pictures, holiday dinners. Clara Ara appeared in almost every frame, always in the background, always smiling. She had quietly built an entire second family, while everyone at the mansion believed her whole world revolved around cooking for one stubborn man. As she packed away mixing bowls, Damien spoke softly. The mansion isn't the same. Clear's throat. She paused. I'm sure everyone adjusted. They didn't. You hired better chefs. I hired 10. And they all know recipes. She looked at him for the first time. They don't know you. He corrected himself before she could answer. No, they don't know me. The admission hung between them. It wasn't really food anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. For perhaps the first time in years, the feared MafiaBoss wasn't standing in front of someone who obeyed him. He was standing in front of the only person who had ever made him laugh at himself, and somewhere between burned garlic, crooked pancakes, and a room full of laughing children. He finally understood what he had truly been chasing the day she walked out of his mansion. It had never been his favorite chef. It had always been the only person who made his house feel like a home. Damien didn't return to the community center the following Saturday, or the Saturday after that. Not because he had changed his mind, because he knew showing up every weekend without saying what truly mattered would only make him another man hiding behind convenient excuses. Some apologies couldn't be delivered in private, not after the mistake had happened in front of an entire household. If he wanted to restore Clara Ara's dignity, he had to do it where he had taken it away. 3 weeks later, the annual Ashcraft-Oft family banquet filled the grand ballroom of the estate. It was the most important night of the year. Leaders from every branch of the organization attended. Business partners flew in from overseas. Politicians, executives, judges, and influential guests filled the tables beneath glittering chandeliers. Everyone expected Damien Ashcraft-Oft to announce new business plans. No one expected him to rewrite the rules of the family. As the final course was cleared away, Damien rose from his chair. The room immediately fell silent. More than 200 people looked toward him. His chief advisor stepped forward with a folder containing the prepared speech. Damien glanced at it once, then quietly closed it. "I'm not giving that speech tonight." Confused whispers spread through the room. Instead, he looked toward the entrance. The massive wooden doors slowly opened. Clara Ara stepped inside. She wasn't wearing a chef's uniform. She wore a simple navy blue dress and the same modest smile she always had. Every conversation stopped. Several captains exchanged puzzled looks. Why had the former chef been invited to the family's most exclusive gathering? Clara Ara looked just as surprised. Earlier that afternoon, she had received a handwritten invitation asking her to attend as an honored guest. Nothing more. She had almost declined. Now she understood why. Damien walked away from the head table, not toward his advisors, not toward his senior captains, toward her. The room became so quiet that the sound of his footsteps echoed across the marble floor. He stopped only a few feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damien turned to face the guests. "My greatest mistake," his calm voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom, was believing that loyalty always sounds like agreement. "No one moved," he continued. "I spent years surrounded by people who obeyed every order." His eyes briefly found Clara Ara before returning to the audience. When someone finally cared enough to argue with me, he paused. I mistook concern for disrespect. The silence grew heavier. I fired one person who was trying hardest to keep me alive. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Several executives looked at one another in confusion. Was the boss apologizing publicly? Damien took another step. This time, he faced Clara Ara directly. "I'm sorry. No excuses, no explanations. Only two simple words. They carried more weight than any speech he had ever given." Clara Ara blinked. She had imagined this conversation many times. None of those versions included 200 witnesses. Before she could answer, one of the older family captains rose abruptly from his chair. "Boss." His voice was respectful but firm. "This is unnecessary." Every eye shifted toward him. "You owe no apology to an employee." Several others nodded in agreement. "Family's authority cannot be weakened. A leader should never bow if word gets out." The captain never finished. Damien slowly turned towards them. His expression remained calm, the same calm expression that usually came moments before everyone else fell silent. "You're right about one thing." The captain straightened. "I am?" Damien nodded once. "A leader shouldn't kneel because he's afraid." The room waited, but he should stand accountable when he's wrong. No one interrupted. Damien looked around the ballroom. "For years, you all followed my orders." Heads nodded across the room. "You arrived when I called. You left when I dismissed you. You agreed before I finished speaking." Another pause. Then he spoke the sentence that none of them would ever forget. "Everybody in this room obeyed me." His gaze found Clara Ara once more. She was the only one brave enough to care whether I lived long enough to enjoy tomorrow. No one breathed. The sentence landed harder than anger ever could. Several staff members quietly lowered their eyes. The elderly butler smiled to himself. He had known this truth long before anyone else. Damien continued. "She never argued because she wanted control. She argued because she believed my life was worth protecting." He let the word settle. and I punished her for it. Across the room, the head of security glanced toward the kitchen staff. More than one of them had tears in their eyes. Not because the boss had apologized, because they finally understood every argument they had witnessed over the past 2 years. None of them had been about coffee or breakfast or vegetables. They had always been acts of quiet care, disguised as stubbornness. Damien reached inside his jacket. The movement instantly put several bodyguards on alert before they realized he wasn't reaching for a weapon. He withdrew a folded white apron, the same one Clara Ara had carefully folded on the dining table the day she walked away. He had kept it every day. Without saying a word, he stepped closer and held it out. "I should have stopped you before you reached the front door." His voice softened, but I was 30 seconds too late. A faint smile appeared on Clara Ara's face. "The first honest thing you've said to me in weeks." Soft laughter spread through the ballroom. Even Damien smiled, only slightly. "But you're still correcting me." "I probably always will." The guests exchanged surprised glances. No one had ever spoken to the boss that way. Yet somehow, instead of looking offended, he looked relieved. For the first time since the banquet began, the atmosphere no longer felt tense. It felt human. Clear as throat. Clara Ara accepted the folded apron, but didn't put it on. She simply held it gently in both hands. "I forgive you." Another silence settled over the room, different this time. Warm, peaceful. But before anyone assumed the story was over, Clara Ara quietly added, "Forgiveness isn't the same as coming back." The smile on Damien's face faded. She looked into his eyes with the same honesty that had always made her impossible to ignore. "I didn't leave because you fired me. I left because I had already accepted that my next journey couldn't begin inside your kitchen." The ballroom fell silent once again. Damien realized there was still something she hadn't told him. Something important. And whatever it was powerful enough to make a woman who had spent 2 years caring for everyone else finally choose herself. The banquet ended. The applause faded. The guests slowly returned to conversations that suddenly felt much less important than the scene they had just witnessed. For the first time in anyone's memory, people weren't discussing business deals or family politics. They were talking about the Mafia boss who had stood in front of hundreds of people and admitted he had been wrong. Yet the person he had apologized to was already gone. Clara Ara had quietly slipped out before the last toast was served. She had never enjoyed being the center of attention, especially not when everyone was looking at her because of someone else's words. 2 evenings later, the lights inside the mansion's kitchen glowed again, not because the staff had returned. Because Clara Ara, as the room looked exactly as she remembered, the copper pots still hung above the island. The old wooden cutting board still carried tiny knife marks from years of hurried dinners. Even the herb garden outside the window had grown exactly as she had left it. She gently placed a small travel bag on the counter. Beside it rested a folder from the hospital. Her surgery had finally been scheduled. In 4 days, she would leave the city for treatment. She hadn't come back for a job. She hadn't come back because of the apology. She had come back to say goodbye. One last meal, one last memory. One quiet thank you to the kitchen that had become her second home. She reached for an onion. Almost immediately, another hand reached for the same knife. "I think I should help." She didn't need to turn around. "I was wondering how long you'd stand at the door." Damien smiled awkwardly. "I've been here almost 5 minutes." "I know." He didn't say anything. "I was waiting to see whether you'd interrupt." "I was trying to behave." She laughed softly. "I'm not sure that's possible." For a brief moment, everything felt wonderfully familiar. She began chopping vegetables. He watched carefully, then reached for another onion. I can do this. You absolutely cannot. I attended one cooking class. You nearly burned down the building. It was one smoke alarm. It was 3. They were sensitive. They were screaming. The silence that followed dissolved into quiet laughter. It was the easiest conversation they had shared in months. Damien rolled up his sleeves. Teach me. She looked genuinely surprised. You? I've spent years expecting everyone else to prepare everything for me. He picked up an apron, folded neatly on the counter. But if we're starting over, I'd like to learn. Clara Ara opened a drawer. Instead of handing him her old apron, she placed a brand new one in his hands. He unfolded it. Across the front, elegant stitching replaced the familiar title. It no longer read Personal Chef. Instead, it read Partner. He stared at it in silence. Clara Ara blinked. I didn't make that. I did. She looked up. You? I asked someone to embroider it. When? The morning after I found your notebook. She gently traced the stitched letters with her fingertips. Partner? Damien nodded. You spent 2 years teaching me how to eat. A small smile appeared. You also taught me something much harder. She waited. That caring about someone isn't weakness. It's responsibility. His voice grew quieter. I spent my whole life building an empire. He looked around the kitchen, and somehow the safest place I've ever known was wherever you happened to be arguing with me. Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just enough to blur the room for a second. She took a slow breath. My treatment starts next week. I know it may take months. I know. I don't know what happens afterward. I know. She smiled sadly. You seem to know everything. He shook his head. No. I only know one thing. He stepped closer. I'm done deciding your future for you. If you choose to come back, I'll be here. If you choose another city, I'll support you. If you decide we're better as friends, I'll respect that. He smiled. But I'm hoping you'll eventually give me the chance to earn something I never deserved. She looked at the apron again. Then back at him. There was no dramatic proposal, no kneeling, no orchestra, only 2 people standing in the kitchen, where every important conversation between them had always begun. Clara Ara tilted her head. So a familiar smile returned to her face. Who's cooking tonight? Damien confidently picked up the frying pan. I am. She opened her mouth to object. Too late. He poured cooking oil into a pan that wasn't even warm, then turned the burner to its highest setting. 5 seconds. Nothing happened. He frowned. I thought this part was faster. It usually is. 10 seconds later, the oil began smoking. 15 seconds, a loud, sizzling sound echoed through the kitchen. 20 seconds, the smoke detector exploded into life. The alarm rang through the entire mansion. Servants rushed into the hallway. Bodyguards instinctively reached for their earpieces. The old butler looked toward the ceiling and sighed. He's cooking again. Inside the kitchen, Damien stared at the smoking pan with complete confusion. I followed the instructions. Clara Ara burst into uncontrollable laughter. Real laughter, the kind that made her lean against the counter because she couldn't stop. Damien looked at the ruined pan, then at her. A second later, he started laughing too. Not like the feared MafiaBoss, whose name made entire organizations tremble. Not like the man who believed every mistake had to be hidden. Just like an ordinary man who had finally discovered that perfection had never been the ingredient missing from his life. The alarm eventually stopped. Kitchen remained a disaster. Dinner was completely ruined, so they ordered pizza. When it arrived, they sat together on the kitchen floor, sharing slices from the same cardboard box, while the brand new apron rested across the back of a nearby chair. Outside, the mansion stood exactly as it always had, powerful, imposing, untouchable. Inside, for the first time in years,